You want to play rough, huh? Good, because that's the only way.
On this channel, we have talked about several fictional characters who have had multiple origins, from Thundercats to He-Man. In this video, we're gonna talk about a G.I. Joe character whose initial origin was unorthodox, to say the least. Let's get into the facts about Sergeant Slaughter.
Here's your answer, Fang Face.
Sergeant Slaughter!
Telling a story is not an easy job, and I think not everyone can pull it off. Usually when we think of a storyteller, we imagine a writer, locked away in their room, building an imaginary world with fictional characters. But a story can come in many different ways. Take wrestling, for example. The history of televised wrestling revolves around real people taking up fictional personas to tell a story. Well, that story culminates in a fight, but fans love these characters portrayed in the ring. You've got Mark Calaway performing as the Undertaker for decades, or Dustin Rhodes playing a bizarre androgynous character called Goldust in the 90s. But long before then, Remus was one of the OG performers who came up with his rough and tough drill instructor persona, Sergeant Slaughter. Although he got popular for a lot of other reasons, the real game changer was when Hasbro turned this act into an official G.I. Joe action figure. Back then, most of the characters were created in the writer's room, but Sergeant Slaughter was himself a story. So instead of just borrowing the idea, Hasbro adapted the man himself. And then, from just being a toy, Slaughter marched into the comics and animated shows with his raspy voice sounding like a 4 a.m. alarm screaming in your ear. So in today's video, I want to take a deep dive into the history of Sergeant Slaughter, which started as a wrestling gimmick. Let's get into it.
What is that? Cobra attack!
Where does Sergeant Slaughter come from before he ever touches a G.I. Joe package? Remus was one of the most popular names in wrestling, especially for his Sergeant Slaughter persona, who literally gave birth to G.I. Joe Slaughter action figure. This was the first time Hasbro took a pretty unique approach to creating a G.I. Joe character based on a real-life figure. The demand for the action figure was high amongst the 70s and 80s kids who got to watch Remus in the ring on a regular basis, but my first encounter with him was through the cartoon shows. Until the 90s, when he became the most hated villain against Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 7. Yet the early 90s saw major ups and downs in Remus's career, which kinda affected the Hasbro business for a while. I'll get to that part later, but first, we gotta know how and when this character was exactly created before he entered the toy line. Now, the actual origin of this persona goes all the way back to the 1970s, when Remus briefly took a break from wrestling. By this time, he was looking for a new identity to come back with a story that could bring more people to his craft. And that's when the idea of a tough US Marine drill instructor popped into his mind. He wanted to look stricter and rougher than most of his fellow wrestlers of that era, and that's exactly what Sergeant Slaughter's character is all about. See, Remus was a fan of military movies, and his all-time favorites were The D.I. and Soldier in the Rain, which directly inspired him to come up with this character. Soon enough, he got fully committed to making the appropriate look for Sarge. The black tank top, camouflage pants, and a campaign hat and black sunglasses became his signature look that Hasbro later copied for the toy. However, the truth was that he was never in the military, but the performance he carried out for all these years was so convincing that no one could tell whether it was real or not. Like most of the former soldiers, Slaughter showed his military-style fatigues and shared his wartime stories that were all just a performance. In 1980, he made a major debut in WWE, also known as WWF then, taking this identity to the wrestling ring. He was introduced as the bad guy that fans were pretty scared of. And why wouldn't they be? He used to invite random wrestlers during the match and try his suffocating grip, called the Cobra Clutch, on them. If anyone would succeed in freeing themselves from the grip, Remus would offer them a cash prize. Well, these are pretty common in wrestling. But it was Remus who made it look so cinematically menacing on television. And that's what clicked with Hasbro. They wanted to bring a character who'd scare the Cobras away just by walking into the room. So, in 1985, they approached Remus to make a life-changing deal of his career. But Remus was already a popular face in wrestling, and Vince McMahon reportedly hated the idea of him making a deal with Hasbro. It was the peak time for WWE in the mid-80s, and they already had their own toy partnerships, so Remus's character would get a wrestling figure anyway. But what Hasbro offered to him was much more serious than McMahon's future endeavors. They were giving Remus the entire spotlight. So the deal was made, and Sergeant Slaughter's action figure was launched in the market. However, fame is fickle, and there's no certainty whether it will stay for long. Things took a messy turn in the 1990s when Sarge made his comeback in the WWF as a pro-Saddam Hussein heel, who criticized his own country during the Persian Gulf War. It made everyone so upset that no one was ready to recognize that this was an act. Remus became the most hated character in wrestling, even getting death threats from those very fans who once worshipped him a decade earlier. This was one huge brick wall of his career that pushed him far away from his growing popularity. Even the hate escalated so much that Hasbro had to back away from the contract. It was the time when kids were absolutely loving these G.I. Joe toys and their stories being played on screen. So, sticking with an Iraqi sympathizer would have sent the wrong messages to their target audience. Years later, when the controversy subsided, Hasbro once again brought him back in 2010 as part of a special release. He made his comeback in the 6-inch classified line, which proved one thing for sure. No matter what Robert Remus was really known for, Sergeant Slaughter became a dynamic and most important character in the G.I. Joe stories, and even Hasbro couldn't ignore that fact.
I'm Sergeant Slaughter. I'm glad to see you got your lazy carcasses out of bed. Now you slobs have...
Where does he first appear in the toy line, and what does the file card tell you? When Sergeant Slaughter was first launched by Hasbro, they came up with a pretty unique distribution strategy. They're always interested in the narrative that sells the product, so they turned the experience of buying a Sergeant Slaughter toy into a secret mission, rather than a regular toy purchase. You can't just go to a toy store and find out the Sergeant Slaughter toys on the shelves waiting for you to buy them. Instead, it would come to you through a mail-away offer. Let me be more specific on that. So, back then, when kids used to buy these regular G.I. Joe figures, some of those packages would come with a special Sergeant Slaughter purchase certificate. You would have to collect at least 5 of these purchase proofs and fill out an official form in the back of that package. Now, putting these 5 certificates and the form in an envelope, you gotta mail it to Hasbro. Within a few weeks, there would be a white cardboard box with your free Sergeant Slaughter figure inside delivered to your doorstep.
All of you tackle me at once!
Where does Marvel first put him in the comics? So, usually when a toy does serious business in the market, Hasbro pushes them into their further endeavors like comics and animation. And they did so with Sergeant Slaughter, who made his very first entry in the 48th issue of G.I. Joe, a real American hero. But this is not going to tell you where he came from or how he became a drill instructor. In none of these issues has Larry Hama ever tried to give him a proper origin, maybe because trying to explain his background would have reduced the influence he has on the audience. This issue, titled Slaughter, introduced him as a new arrival, but quickly put him in an authoritative role. The issue opens in Cobra Island, where Baroness has killed Storm Shadow, who's presumably gone. Still, Destro isn't sure whether he truly died or he's faking his death. So Destro lets the eels take the body and keep it in storage. Snake Eyes is quite devastated after losing Storm Shadow, who was like a brother to him. Meanwhile, in the pit's lowest level in the sickbay, a wounded Ripcord is under Doc's observation. But Doc finds out the DNA sample in his blood doesn't match Ripcord. But before he could understand the issue, an intruder dressed as Snake Eyes knocks him out and escapes the room. Actually, Zartan has infiltrated the pit and has been using his chameleon powers to change shapes. He has taken the shape of Snake Eyes, then Tripwire, even Doc, and lastly, by impersonating Duke, he wants to get out of this place. But the problem is that the pit is a highly enclosed area with only a motor pool on the sole route for the commute. By this time, the soldiers are aware of only one route, so Sergeant Slaughter steps in to open their eyes about the vicinity. So, Slaughter's arrival is quite cinematic, because he's still a pretty big deal in the comics. He first appeared in front of the soldiers asking for a way to get in, but the soldiers thought this couldn't be a new arrival, but an intruder in an army disguise. So they team up against him, but lucky for them, It was, in fact, Sergeant Slaughter, who then gave him a taste of their own medicine. He simply knocked some boots down to prove his presence in the room and his dominance over them. When the soldiers let him know that there's an unwanted visitor in the base, Slaughter asks them to check the ventilation ducts because these damn things are the main weak links. And guess what? Ventilation ducts are the route Zartan has been using for all this time. At a point, he turns into Duke and tries to mislead Gung Ho, but he saw through this facade and gave him a punch, turning him back to Zartan. He then takes the shape of Gung Ho, but right on time, Slaughter appears and wastes no time. He throws a punch right at the imposter, exposing Zartan. Slaughter has made one thing clear by this time. He is here to take charge and whip these exhausted soldiers back in shape to kick some Cobra ass. However, the issue ends with a terrifying revelation that the previous meeting between the Cobra diplomat and the US officers came to some shady terms. The US has been forced to make an alliance with the Cobras. Otherwise, they're gonna build a missile site on their beachfront property near America's heartland. At the end, the jugglers call General Hawk in to issue a new order. The order is to withdraw all operations and intelligence from Cobra Island, or else there will be an endless war.
Whatever that mission is definitely Major League. This here.
Where does the Sunbow cartoon first deploy him, and what does it make him? The very first time Sergeant Slaughter appeared in Sunbow's animated series, he landed right in the middle of a big problem. This is the 1986 Season 2 opener of G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, presented as a 5-part miniseries called Arise Serpentor, Arise. In this season, General Hawk also made his debut in the animation, along with Slaughter, who was voiced by Remus himself. But when Hawk remains in the background, trying to figure out strategies to win the situation, Slaughter's immense strength puts him in a real trouble. In the opening, we see General Hawk, along with Flint and Duke, running an inspection on the Joes, who have grown lazy due to a lack of regular field jobs. Meanwhile, the Cobras have been waiting for this opportunity to launch a surprise attack on them, so they send their battle android troopers to beat the shit out of them. During the fight, Sergeant Slaughter made his appearance in his Triple T tank, coming to save the Joes from these androids. Hawk alone couldn't defeat these troopers, so he turned to Sergeant Slaughter for help and advice. He recruits the sergeant to train the Joes rigorously, but Slaughter doesn't want to discriminate. He asks Hawk to train alongside the Joes because, after all, he is also a soldier and he needs field training. On the other hand, the Cobra commander has been an outdated choice for a leader, as per Dr. Mindbender, who had a vision in his dreams that they need a supremely powerful leader for their terrorist organization. For that, they would have to collect DNA samples from all the legendary warriors and kings across history, like Napoleon, Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan, Hannibal, Sun Tzu, and many more. Immediately, the Cobra set out on a worldwide mission to excavate the tombs of these great leaders. The G.I. Joe members, who initially had no idea why these tombs are being hunted, still tried to prevent their attack, but the Cobras managed to get all the DNA samples except for the one that belonged to Sun Tzu. Sergeant Slaughter is actively involved in these missions against the Cobras, and he's been doing his stunts on the enemies for all this time, which caught the attention of Dr. Mindbender. He's pretty determined to use Slaughter's DNA as a substitute for the final recipe. So they capture Slaughter and use his DNA to complete the process. But the end result was terrifying. It wasn't a human figure, but a vicious, bloodthirsty beast that attacked the Cobras. Basically, Cobra Commander, who realized his position was at stake, released a mutagen in the final mixture that messed up with their creation. But unfortunately for him, Mindbender repeated the process and eventually created their intended leader, Serpentor. Sergeant Slaughter, on the other hand, defeats the monster in a fight, but Serpentor was successfully born. In the latter parts of the miniseries, Serpentor takes the helm and gets even more aggressive than Cobra Commander. In the last part, Slaughter was no longer a central figure, but he was always there for the soldiers whenever they needed a hand to take them out of the pit. Still, the writers of the animation never thought about digging into his past. Rather, the series almost completely avoided that area. Maybe there was one tiny bit of information about his past, in that he could understand ancient Greek as he studied the language for a year in college. But to be honest, this doesn't make much difference to his arc, and the mystery around his origins stayed the same throughout the G.I. Joe run. In later episodes of the second season, he continued to appear in his usual form. Some of these episodes are Ninja Holiday, The Most Dangerous Thing in the World, My Brother's Keeper, the Golden Fleece, and Into Your Tent I Will Silently Creep.
This is for Falcon!
Where does the animated movie put him in the story? Finally, Sergeant Slaughter made it to the movie, the very first animated film adaptation of G.I. Joe in '87, where Remus once again voiced his own character. In this entire film, Slaughter plays somewhat of a central figure because he's the only competent adult who can fight the Cobra villains. So the film opens with a huge Cobra conflict that is leading their team to collapse. Cobra Commander, who cannot stand the new leader, Serpentor, always gets in a quarrel with him. Meanwhile, a really ancient civilization called Cobra La comes right into the picture. One of them, called Pythona, claims Serpentor as their own because they're the reason he exists in this world. Actually, it was Cobra La who had manipulated Mindbender's visions to show him the DNA of Serpentor. And now that the leader is created, they want him back. But not that easily. They want Serpentor to prove himself by stealing the BET weapon used by the G.I. Joes. Serpentor initially tried to plan the game, but was caught by the Joes. During this time, some of the new recruits of the team were introduced to us, including Falcon, who was Duke's younger half-brother. Now, Falcon is in no way ready to abide by the rules and laws of G.I. Joe. He was reckless and stubborn, and mainly because of him, Serpentor escaped from captivity. So Hawk got furious at Falcon and thought of doing a court-martial to kick him out of the group. But that wasn't necessary when Sergeant Slaughter stepped in for help. In Slaughterhouse, the sergeant trained Falcon into one of the best men of their group. One of his funniest dialogues that I can remember is, "There are two ways out of my command. On your feet like a man, or in a ditty bag. An itty bitty ditty bag." I don't know about Falcon, but if I were in that place, I would get the hell out of there right away. Anyways, that really helped Falcon to get on the right track. But the Cobras were just out there waiting for the right time to pounce. Here, we also meet with the Renegades. They're this group of outcast soldiers who operate from Slaughterhouse, and their team includes Mercer, a former Cobra Viper, Red Dog, a former football player, and Taurus, an acrobat and fighter. Now Slaughter's role has shifted, and he is no longer just a military trainer. So he ran the mission along with his team and sneaked inside the Terror Drome, where he found out about the Cobra mission to steal the BET. The final straw came when the Cobra directly launched an attack on the Joes for the BET, and Serpentor even tried to kill Falcon. Duke jumped right in to save his brother, but got severely injured and went into a coma. The Joes are now in a very vulnerable position since Duke was left in the sickbay. Meanwhile, their mission took place in the Himalayas, where the treacherous landscape was already leading the Joes to have second thoughts about the mission. So here comes Sergeant Slaughter, who says, "Either we all go home, or nobody goes home." Now that's the real warrior spirit, inspiring enough of the other members of the team. On the other hand, Cobra Commander, whose arrogance went a little out of hand, hilariously turned into a real snake-like creature. Meanwhile, back in Cobra La's underground city, the Joes face off with the rest of the Cobra team, including Pythona and the enforcer of Nemesis. It was basically Slaughter, Jinx, and Falcon who fought against the enemies, especially Slaughter, who had an intense hand-to-hand fight with the Nemesis guy and Pythona. He hit them pretty hard, leading them to fall into a deep pit. Finally, Falcon managed to reconfigure the BET weapon and destroy the spore pods of Cobra La's hidden base. Cobra La's plan eventually failed, and the G.I. Joe soldiers all survived. Duke finally woke up from his coma and rejoined the team. The movie introduced Falcon, making him somewhat of a central figure in the story. But the man of the hour was indeed Sergeant Slaughter, who outshines everyone just by walking into a scene.
Where do you think you're going, turkey?
Where does the DIC series promote him and give him a new team? After Sunbow's animation became known worldwide, and the stories of G.I. Joe reached everywhere, DIC Entertainment produced a 5-part miniseries titled Operation Dragonfire in 1989. Sergeant Slaughter was a major highlight for the show, leading a G.I. Joe assault team called Slaughter's Marauders, along with a newly introduced character named Leonard Michaels, aka Scoop, who was a Crimson Guardsman, sneakily associated with the Cobra. Slaughter's Marauders introduced some of the important Joe members, like Mutt, the Canine Handler, Lowlight, the Night Operation Sniper, Spirit the Tracker, Barbecue the Firefighter, and Footloose the Ground Pounder. So the series picks up from where the film had left off, with the usual Cobra chaos because the commander is still a snake and Serpentor is trying to gain full-blown authority over everything. Meanwhile, Destro has been fooling around with Zarana, making the Baroness jealous of their relationship. So Baroness, with the help of Nagahide, tried to grab the ancient energy of Dragonfire to help Cobra Commander get back to his human form. The Buddhist monastery had hidden this ancient energy source, and only they could activate it through chanting some spells. To seize the energy weapon that could shift the entire power dynamics of Cobra, they launched an attack on the Himalayas. Sergeant Slaughter and his team came to prevent them, but Slaughter's tank was destroyed, and he was nearly crushed. That was the time when Scoop saved his life to gain his trust. Slaughter recruited Scoop to the team, saying that just by looking at a man, he sensed their true potential. But one thing he couldn't sense was that Scoop was nothing but a rat working for Cobra. Meanwhile, within the monastery, the undercover Crimson Guard agents recorded the chanting of the spell and passed it to Cobra, who activated the energy source from all Dragonfire bases. It also helped Cobra Commander to turn back to his human form, but that was not the only thing that Dragonfire did. Slaughter's Marauders continued their fight against the enemies, and in one scene, when the Dragonfire energy turned all the monkeys of the jungle into ferocious ape warriors, Slaughter fought them with his bare hands, beating those monkeys down single-handedly. The Cobras eventually stepped back after Scoop changed sides. Scoop joined the Cobras because he was manipulated by them into thinking that G.I. Joe had destroyed his family. By the end of Operation Dragonfire, it was clear that the Cobras were the real culprits behind his loss. So, in the final battle that took place in Mesa, Scoop gave G.I. Joe the frequency to disable Cobra's links with the Dragonfire bases. By activating the frequency, a chain reaction was triggered that neutralized all the bases of Dragonfire and subdued its energy. Once again, the Cobras backed off, and Sergeant Slaughter proved himself to be a visionary. Although Scoop's initial intention was pure revenge, Slaughter's intense training and moral code inspired him to choose the right side. The G.I. Joe franchise couldn't continue with Robert Remus after the controversy that almost made him look like a national threat. His association with Hasbro was temporarily cancelled due to all this backlash. But his legacy still matters, even after all the decades have passed, and maybe that's why I'm still talking about him today. On that note, this video is over. If you're a die-hard Slaughter fan or a G.I. Joe fanatic, let us know about your personal feelings about this character in the comments down below. Also, if you liked the video, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until then, goodbye, and see you in the next one.